Hello everyone. Got 10 dirty adult jokes for you today. So 3 sisters decided to get married on the same day to save their parents the expense of separate weddings. As a further step to reduce the price tag, the 3 sisters resolved to spend their honeymoon night at home. Later that night, their mother couldn't sleep, so she went to the kitchen for a cup of tea. On her way, she tiptoed by her oldest daughter's bedroom and heard her screaming. The mother thought to herself, "That's normal, especially on her wedding night." She snuck by her second oldest daughter's room and heard her laughing. "That's normal too," she said, smiling to herself. Finally, she slipped by her youngest daughter's room where she didn't hear a peep, but she thought nothing of it. The next morning in the kitchen, after the husbands had gone out, the woman asked her eldest daughter about last night's noises. "Well, Mom," she replied, "you always said if it hurt I should scream." "You're absolutely right, sweetheart," the mother assured her, turning to her middle daughter. "Now why were you laughing?" she asked. "You always said if it tickled I could laugh," she answered. "True enough, honey." The mother smiled, remembering her newlywed days. "Now it's your turn, baby," she said, turning to her youngest daughter. "Why was it so quiet in your room last night?" "Mom, don't you remember? You always told me never to talk with my mouth full." So a man is in a hotel lobby. He wants to ask the clerk a question. As he turns to go to the front desk, he accidentally bumps into a woman beside him, and as he does, his elbow goes into her breast. They are both startled, and he says, "Ma'am, if your heart is as soft as your breast, I know you'll forgive me." She replies, "If your willy is as hard as your elbow, I'm in room 122. Bill and his wife decided that the only way to pull off a Sunday afternoon quickie with their 10-year-old son in the apartment was to send him out on the balcony and order him to report on all the neighborhood activities. The boy began his commentary as his parents put their plan into operation. "There's a car being towed from the parking lot," he said. "An ambulance just drove by. A few moments passed. Looks like the Andersons have company," he called out. "Matt's riding a new bike and the Coopers are having sex." Mom and Dad shot up in bed. "How do you know that?" the startled father asked. "Their kid is standing out on the balcony too," his son replied. An elderly Italian man went to his parish priest and asked if the priest would hear his confession. "Of course, my son," said the priest. "Well, Father, at the beginning of World War II, a beautiful woman knocked on my door and asked me to hide her from the Germans. I hid her in my attic, and they never found her. That's a wonderful thing, my son, and nothing that you need to confess," said the priest. "It's worse, Father. I was weak and told her that she had to pay for rent of the attic with her sexual favors," continued the old man. "Well, it was a very difficult time, and you took a large risk. You would have suffered terribly at their hands if the Germans had found you hiding her. I know that God, in his wisdom and mercy, will balance the good and the evil and judge you kindly," said the priest. "Thanks, Father," said the old man. "That's a load off of my mind. Can I ask another question?" "Of course, my son," said the priest. The old man asked, "Do I need to tell her that the war is over?" One night a little girl walks in on her parents making love. The mother is going up and down on the father, and when she sees her daughter looking at them, she immediately stops. "What are you doing, Mommy?" The mother too embarrassed to tell her little girl about sex, so she makes up an answer. "Well, sweetie, sometimes Daddy's tummy gets too big, so I have to jump up and down on it to flatten it out." The little girl replies, "Well, Mommy, you really shouldn't bother with that." The mother has a confused look on her face. "Why do you say that, sweetheart?" The little girl replies, "Because, Mommy, Every time you leave in the morning, the lady next door comes over and blows it back up. So a father and his 6-year-old son are walking down the street, and they come across 2 dogs humping. The boy is shocked by what he sees and asks his father, "Daddy, what are they doing?" The father, not wanting to lie to his son, says they're just making a puppy. "Okay," says the son. And the father is relieved that he doesn't probe further. The next day, the son bursts into his parents' room and sees them making love. The father jumps up and quickly covers himself, knowing he's in for an interesting talk. Walks downstairs with him and they sit at the dining room table. His son asks him, "Daddy, what were you and mommy doing?" Again, wanting to be honest with his son, he says, "Me and mommy were making a baby." His son pauses for a moment, thinking, and then replies, "Flip mommy over. I want a puppy." So this morning, I was minding my own business, riding in an elevator when all of a sudden, I found myself face to face with a woman who had huge breasts. I couldn't help but stare, and before I knew it, she was speaking to me. "Press 1, she said with a sly smile on her face. Without thinking, I did as she asked, and that's the last thing I remember. So a young man and his date were parked on a back road some distance from town. They were about to make love when the girl stopped. I really should have mentioned this earlier, but I'm actually a hooker and I charge $20. The man reluctantly paid her, and they did their thing. After a cigarette, the man just sat in the driver's seat looking out the window. "Why aren't we going anywhere?" asked the girl. "Well, I should have mentioned this before, but I'm actually a taxi driver, and the fare back to town is $25. A guy with a wild mop of hair walked into the barber shop and asked, "How long before I can get a haircut?" The barber, a no-nonsense kind of guy, looked around the shop full of customers and said, "About 2 hours. The guy, looking a bit disappointed, thanked the barber and left. A few days later, the same guy with the wild hair stuck his head into the door again and asked, "How long before I can get a haircut?" The barber, still busy with customers, looked around the shop again and said, "About 3 hours. The guy left once more, looking dejected. A week went by and the same guy with the wild hair walked into the barber shop yet again and asked, "How long before I can get a haircut?" The barber, starting to get curious, looked around the shop and said, "About an hour and a half." The guy left, but this time, the barber couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. So, he turned to his friend Bob, who was sweeping up hair on the floor, and said, "Hey Bob, do me a favor, follow him and see where he goes. He keeps asking how long he has to wait for a haircut, but he never comes back." A little while later, Bob returned to the shop, laughing hysterically. The barber asked, "So, where does he go when he leaves?" Bob looked up, wiped the tears from his eyes, and said, "Your house." So one morning while his wife was making breakfast, a man walked up to her and gave her a healthy pinch on her butt. He said to her, "If you firmed up your butt, we could get rid of your girdle." The wife was angry but said nothing. The next morning her husband pinched her breast and said, "If you firm these up, we could get rid of your bra." The wife grabbed her husband's willy and replied, "And if you firm this up, we could get rid of the mailman, the gardener, the pool man, and your brother."